Hey, I'm Mark Lanier, and I want to talk to you about the ethics of persuasion. Persuasion has been around as a craft, some might say an art, for not just centuries, but millennia. A classic work that people still study today on persuasion is a work done by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, student of Plato, who was a student of Socrates. Aristotle, who was the tutor to Alexander the Great. Aristotle, who wrote the crowning achievement on rhetoric that ruled the day for centuries and is still read today. And what Aristotle did is he said, good, effective persuasion is based upon three different premises, much like a three-legged stool. And so he approached persuasion looking at those three different angles. And I will talk about those with you. But before I do that, I think more important is that we consider what the ethical question is. And we're going to do that by talking about the difference between persuasion and propaganda. So let's talk about those differences, then we'll go to Aristotle's rhetoric and discuss what he had to say. And then in conclusion, we'll talk about why it seems to make any difference at all in your life and mine, professionally, personally, or just as a consumer out there in this world, because people are trying to persuade you all day long. And you need to be aware of the difference between ethical persuasion and propaganda. So let's begin. Propaganda is the idea of something that is being sold to you, something you're being persuaded to, a way to reinforce a bias or a prejudice or a belief that you might have in a way that's not based upon reason, but is based upon a manipulation of you. So let me give you an example, actually several. There was a fellow named Miller who in 1937 published a preeminent paper where he talked about 7 different forms of propaganda. This is ways to manipulate people to believe something that are not of really proper logical reasons to believe, but are used nonetheless. And the first one that Miller wrote about is what he called the plain folks approach. This is the idea of, hey, I'm just one of you. I live in the United States of America. I can't tell you how many times we see candidates running for public office who will show up to work in a factory or to work on a food line with their sleeves rolled up, their work gear on, the cameras come on and the media comes in, and the candidate for office will do the work to look like they're a common person, and then the cameras are done, the media are gone, and the candidate flees and puts back on whatever clothes they would normally wear and becomes the person they really are. You see, that's propaganda. It's not genuine persuasion, not ethical persuasion, I should say. The second is a testimonial type of approach. This is one that says, hey, you can believe me on this because I saw it. This is especially prominent now in our internet age. You'll get emails that claim some of the most preposterous things there are. And the email will say, hey, I know this to be true, when it's not any more true than the man in the moon. I have had people send me emails that say, oh, listen to this. This is just tragic. Look what's happening in the world today. And I would email them back and say, that's not true. It doesn't matter that the person says they saw it. It's still not true. So that's a second area of propaganda, unethical persuasion. A third area that Miller lists is the bandwagon effect. This is like, hey, everybody else is doing it. You better get on board. As if the mere fact everyone else is doing something makes it right. The Nazi Third Reich used the bandwagon effect. Hitler used the bandwagon effect to get everybody moving with herd mentality toward the same horrible end. To persuade people by peer pressure, by, hey, come on, everybody else is doing it, is not ethical persuasion. Now, a fourth area that Miller talked about is what we might call card stacking. It's where you only present one side of an issue or one side of a case. You got to always be careful with card stacking. This is something that lawyers, my profession, are commonly accused of doing and maybe rightly accused of doing. They just present one side of a case. And yet, the ethics of practicing law says that we are supposed to seek justice and we are to have candor. The official language is candor toward the tribunal. It means that if there's a case that says the opposite of what we want done, we have an obligation to point it out to the court. We can't card stack. We can't just put one side of the story out there. That's not ethical persuasion. A fifth is guilt by association. This is one where if in America, there are a lot of people who claim to be religious Christians who use their Christianity as a political club to say, support this political candidate or this political party. And because there are some people who are so outspoken about this, it can make the rest of us who don't share necessarily those politics seem guilty just because we're associated as a Christian. And I always want to say, do not judge me by the Christians that seem to be making the news. Judge me by the Jesus Christ that I follow, who loved the lost, who cared for the hurt, who tried to restore the abandoned. That's who I want to be judged by. Don't hold me guilty by association with others. A sixth area of propaganda are what are called glittering generalities. This is where, you just say, oh, that's fake news. Or you just assign some generality, let's talk about family values. Or it can be just these lines that seem to make sense to us, but really have no meaning behind them. They're just a glittering generality. And that's not ethical persuasion either. The last that Miller gives is name calling. And this is where instead of talking about the merits of something, we just say, well, a bunch of Nazis. Or we say, this is just a bunch of left liberals, a bunch of communists, or these are a bunch of right-wing nutsos. And we just do name calling, which is not ethical persuasion either. So if those are propaganda instead of ethical persuasion, is there ethical persuasion? Is there room for us to persuade? I would say yes, as I talked to you about my second area, Aristotle and his rhetoric. Aristotle said good persuasion, and I would say ethical persuasion, is built off of those three legs that I told you about on his stool. The first one is the leg of ethos. We get the word ethics from it. The presenter, the persuader, needs to be someone of integrity. If you don't have personal integrity, you're going to have a hard problem persuading someone of a message because your lack of integrity is going to leak through and affect your ability to persuade, certainly to persuade ethically. The second area that Aristotle talked about was pathos. We get pathology from it, but what Aristotle meant was the disposition and the mindset of the audience who's being persuaded. And this is something that's very important to any persuasive message. It needs to be tailored to the people who are going to be hearing it. But we have to be careful because study after study after study has shown there is power in, for example, instilling fear in people with a message. So if we scare you to death, we might be able to persuade you to do something. And so looking at the attitudes and the reception that the audience is going to give to the message is an important part of ethical persuasion. Then the third element for Aristotle, as he discussed this, was logos. We get the word logic from it. It's also the Greek word for speech or message and or word. And Aristotle was talking about the coherent logic of a message, that a message needs to be accurate. In fact, Aristotle goes through some of the things Miller talks about presciently, because he's writing 2,300 years earlier or 2,400 years earlier. But he even says, don't stack the cards. You got to give both sides to the argument if you're going to be ethical and credible in your persuasion. So if we can look at propaganda and we can look at ethical persuasion under Aristotle, where does that make a difference to you and me? Let me suggest it makes a difference in the big questions. It makes a difference in the little questions. The big questions. Look at things like, do we believe in God? And that's one of the most fundamental questions you've got. And yet so many of the arguments against believing in God, and dare I say sometimes the arguments for believing in God, are based upon propaganda rather than ethical persuasion. Name calling, guilt by association, glittering generalities, plain folks talk, bandwagon talk. Hey, you can't be a believer in God. None of the smart people are. Those types of arguments are absolutely atrocious when it comes to ethical, logical persuasion on a point. That's no more useful than saying, believe in God, all smart people do. No, let's look at big, important questions, but let's look at them ethically before we're persuaded. It's not just the big questions, it's the little questions. What you eat is affected by propaganda and persuasion. A TV advertisement or a magazine advertisement or an internet advertisement or a paper advertisement for this, that, or the other. An attempt to get you to buy this car because everyone else is. It's the most popular car there is, ergo it must be the car for you. All of these same types of propaganda tools are being used to you incessantly. And we need to be discerning about these things. One of the reasons I am a Christian, and one of the reasons it affects me in the practice of law as I persuade for a living, is it informs me with the need to be authentic and the need to be true and the need to be well-reasoned in what I believe, because there are lots of deceptions that are out there. And a deception that takes root can destroy your life. A deception that takes root can rob you of joy and of peace, of courage and purpose. Those are all things we're meant to have, but we only have them if we have a legitimate, authentic understanding of who we are, who God is, and what's going on in this world around us. That's found through ethical persuasion. That firm ground will not be found through tools of propaganda. So I hope you'll think about this. Think about the other wonderful things on the Aka channels. But in the process, always, always, always be focused in and make sure that not only are you not talking to others with propaganda, but don't let that propaganda influence you. I'm Mark Lanier. Thank you for this time.
Hey guys, how are we doing? My name's Nadia and I'm part of OCA, the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. And we just want to say thank you for watching our video. At OCA, we love to look into the big questions facing our time and our culture to see how the Christian faith gives answers that are both rational and rich in their understanding. If you enjoyed this video and you want to come along with us, then why not check out the rest of the content on this channel? Please consider subscribing and following as well, so that we can keep on making content like this. We really want to hear from you guys, so if you have ideas of questions that we can look into or content that we can make, then please drop a comment down below or get in touch with us directly. We want to say thank you as well to the speakers, to the donors, to the filmmakers, and also to you guys for making it happen. You know, it takes about 60 hours to create a film like this, and that's because we want it to be carefully researched. We want the talk to flow beautifully, and we want the filmmaking to be smooth. But that all takes time. And here at Oka, our staff are funded by people who share our vision. So if you want to partner with the work that we are doing, please consider donating. I'll catch you next time.